Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you're all doing great. So I thought today we'll do some a bit more grounded or more practical discussions. And I thought about the subject of kind of simplifying our lives. So the first question would be kind of, why would you want to simplify your life, right? Because life is life, right? Different things are happening, and what can we really do about it? But actually, there's a very strong component to whether our life is complicated or whether it's simple. And I think we're playing a major role in organizing our lives, in organizing this kind of structure that we might perceive as being either simple or complicated. So why would you want to simplify your life? Well, I think that mental states such as stress, anxiety, or worrying about certain things in our lives, within ourselves or within our people, come from this fact that perhaps our lives are too complicated for us in a sense. So things like worrying removes us from what is, for example, and what happens is that we're going on this kind of mental trips where we start developing different assumptions about the future, about what could be, or even about what is. So that kind of leads us to this idea that whether our life is simple or whether it's complicated depends on what sort of things we focus on, how we interpret our experience, and perhaps I would also add to this list kind of how far we can go into this maybe mental realm, our thoughts, where we make assumptions, where we go into this intellectual trips, as I like to call them, and instead of being present, instead of being grounded, instead of focusing on what is happening within us, around us, we start focusing on our thoughts. So do you think there are any other reasons why we would want to simplify our lives? I think that worrying, anxiety, stress could be the major reasons, but perhaps you'd like to maybe join the discussion and share your thoughts on why would you like to simplify your life. And I think that another component of reasons for simplifying life is the fact that we might simply not know what to do. So we might not know what we want, we might not know what we need, where we need to go, what sort of career we should pursue, or simply which place we want to live, how we want our lives to look like. So again, you see here what's happening. The more I reflect on why I would like to, for example, simplify my life, the more I do it, the more on this intellectual trip I'm going. And what happens is, the more I do it, the more it removes me from simple things, from simple solutions, from things that are present and that might be needed to my life. And I know that maybe some people could say like, all right, so am I against intellectualism? And in fact, maybe to your surprise, I actually am, because I've spent years on reading books, exploring different theories, philosophy, psychology. I'm actually still in academia, so like I can't fully separate myself from this intellectual part of life. But it's not life. That's the thing. It's not living. When you research all these ideas, when you try to be maybe smart or competent or know as much as you can, this is not life. It's useful, right? To some extent it's useful because it enables us to comprehend what's happening. It enables us to understand ourselves, to understand the world around us, to understand other people. But at the same time, we need to be able to let it go. So it is just a tool. It is just a tool, very useful tool that we can use in certain situations, but it doesn't define ourselves. It doesn't define our lives. Because simply life doesn't happen inside our heads. So that kind of leads us to this next idea of why we would like to simplify our lives, so that we don't live in our heads, but we actually start seeing results of our actions. We can start experiencing life and living in this whole kind of spectrum of different, sensations, feelings, thoughts, mental states, right? So intellect is not all there is. So one more time, as usual, I would really like to encourage you to participate in the discussion. There is a chat box. You can share your ideas. In fact, I would recommend doing that, because the more you do it, the more you can gain from these live streams. And also, you can become a kind of co-creator of this live stream, because as some of you who already been in my live streams, I read these comments, maybe not all of them because it might be quite difficult for me, but I read these comments, and that kind of contributes to the discussion and the direction in a way to where this live stream is going. And of course, you are welcome to ask any questions that you might be having. I'm happy to answer them. So any other reasons for wanting to simplify your life? I think there's another possibility, or another reason, as I might want to call it, is the fact that the more we complicate our lives. So as you can see here, I recognize that each of us is playing a role in how simple, complicated our life is. But the more complicated our life is, or the more we make it complicated, the more numb or empty we might start feeling. Why? Because it's too many things, right? So for example, we might feel like we're having too many responsibilities, too many things to do, too many priorities, which are not really priorities if there are that many of them, too many problems maybe, too many things to focus, too many people to focus, too many relationships to cultivate, right? So there's this question, I think, of the amount of things we need to pay attention to, things that we need to invest our energy in. So the more cluttered our life is, which is the more things we need to pay attention to, the more things we need to engage our energy is, the more cluttered it is, the more overwhelming it's gonna feel. And the more overwhelming it's gonna feel, most likely the more numb or empty we will feel as well. Why? Because you only have as much resources, these inner resources, to spend. So inner resources like resilience, which is ability to tolerate different emotions, stress, adversities in life, or the ability to face challenges, right? Other kind of inner resources include empathy, for example. For me, it's a big one, considering my career. So all these resources are limited. You can't expect having constant ability. You can't expect that you can have this ability to stay constantly focused or engaged in everything around you. So what happens is that the more cluttered your life is, the more you will experience that your life is draining your resources. So when your resources are drained, these inner resources, the more empty or numb you're going to start feeling, because you still want to engage with life, for example. You still know that there are some responsibilities that you need to attend to, but there's no resources, so there's no engagement. So you won't be able to fully engage with life, the more complicated everything is. Is it possible to live a life too simply? Where's the place where we find balance? Baron asks. Well, you define it for yourself, where it's too simply. Where is the limit? Where is the balance? Where it's too complicated? So I cannot tell you when it's too simply, because for me, for example, what might be very simple and balanced, for you maybe it's too simple. right? And the other way around. What for me is very complicated, for example, it might be very simple for you. So it's very subjective. So finding that balance is entirely up to you. If it's too simple, I would say in this general abstract terms, if it's too simple, you would know that it's too simple by not feeling that you're moving forward, not feeling any growth or development. You would probably feel kind of stagnated in a sense. Or you would feel like you're maybe a little bit restless and you want to do something more. You want to have something more. I would imagine that would be the clues of knowing whether it's too simple for you, for example. But at the same time, maybe the idea of a too simple life doesn't exist. Maybe we make it so. So again, there's this idea, there's this importance of our perception and understanding and interpretation of our experience. Hi Claypunk. I understood the power of now from Eckhart Tolle's work. When I'm able to achieve presence, it's great, but most of the time it's not easy. Is there a way to use intellect to aid presence? In a way, yes. So with intellect, I don't want to go too much into because we're going to deviate from the subject too much, but with intellect is a tool. So for example, you can use intellect for creating certain words that are meaningful to you. So when you bring in a word, it brings in a particular mental state. You can use intellect to interpret your experience and make sense of it. I think this one is the most important. So for example, when you are not present, you can use intellect to conceptualize that you are not present and what is happening and be as descriptive as you can. Do you live to work or work to live? How can you get balance? Yeah, that is a good question, which is very subjective as well. So you see, there are many reasons for wanting to simplify our lives and why simplifying our lives would be a good idea. So I would imagine there are many more. Like for example, maybe for some people, too many material things. If you kind of start stretching outside of ourselves into this environment, we could also say that for some people, maybe too many material things might be complicating their life. For example, if you have too many clothes or too many furnitures, right? You're gonna feel cluttered, like your life is cluttered. If you live in a too big house, for example, you might feel like it's too much and it's overwhelming. So our environment and material possessions, I think, play a huge role in terms of whether we see our lives as being simple or complicated. So kind of paying attention to this material realm or our environment is kind of important in this concept too. So based on all that, you can probably start getting an idea of how we complicate our lives, how we end up in places where we feel overwhelmed, stressed out, or worried, where we feel like it's too much, where we feel like we lack control, where we have no control, where we feel like everything is disorganized. All these symptoms are actually a manifestation that we made our life too complicated in a sense. Or you could also say that the life itself is too complicated for us to handle. But I personally have a problem with the second description because it removes the personal responsibility. So when you say that life is too complicated for you to handle, that removes personal responsibility, right? You put energy out there. But the moment we start saying that I made my life too complicated, that gives you that personal power. So you start owning your experience and you start owning your actions and behaviors and what you can do in your life, right? It gives you more control in a sense. So it doesn't mean, my mind sometimes go into this, what if? And then I start thinking like, okay, but what if someone asks me, how far can you go with that personal responsibility? Because like you cannot control the whole life itself. You cannot control the whole world or the society. So you need to be kind of realistic with this. But in practical terms, kind of this is, I think, is a good example of when we start paying attention to how we use our language, how it switches or changes things in our lives. So you can see here that we can start develop a list of different things of how we complicate our life. And the first one is, as I was briefly mentioning before, is this intellectualism. So getting into our heads too much, too much thinking, too much reading, too many theories, too much philosophy, too much, intellect on that is not very balanced with emotional life or practical life. So what happens is, the more we go into this intellectual realm, the more we start analyzing our lives, analyzing ourselves, analyzing what is happening. The more we do it, the more we remove ourselves from this present moment, the grounded experience, and the more we lose focus of what actually is. What is that experience? So again, there needs to be some balance. I'm not saying that intellect is useless, that thinking is useless, or research is useless, but it's just a tool. So I think that the good way to manage intellect is to keep it simple. So again, it comes back to this simplicity. What I mean by that is, only invest in intellectual work when it's necessary. So when you get your answer, when you find what you are looking for, when you feel that it's simply kind of, it's just enough, you know enough, you need to let it go. I know it might be maybe difficult for some people, but there's this act of letting go. When you start perceiving that you spend too much time so-called in your head, spending too much time thinking or reading or analyzing things in your life, that is kind of wake-up call and a red flag that it's time to go back to the present moment experience, to focusing on your own holistic experience, so what you experience, what you're feeling, what your sensations are, what is happening around you, to kind of get you outside of your head. So I think that this one is actually the main reason how we, maybe not the main reason, but the major way in which we complicate our lives. Because what happens is that, for example, if we have this tendency to go into intellectual realm, and we have this tendency to overthink, to analyze without knowing when to stop, what happens is that when we encounter times when we have to make a decision, for example, solve a problem, we are not very effective, because we've been spending so much time in our heads that it leads to the development of assumptions, ideas, opinions, right? We start to create all these different theories in our heads that prevent us from, making good decisions, effective decisions that will move us forward in life. Not get us to maybe specific place or this imagined place based on these assumptions that we've been thinking about, but it will start moving us forward. And this one is the most important one. So I think this is just the just one example of how intellect might prevent us from living presently and in this holistic way, and can actually start complicating in our lives. And one more thing I could add to it is that intellect actually is very often responsible for creating all these problems in our lives as well. Because if we didn't analyze as much, if we didn't develop all these assumptions and theories on what is happening, we wouldn't be having as many problems. Very often that is the case. And a majority of these problems are, in a way we create them in our heads again. So this is something I think to pay attention as well. Randy asks, can you really live a balanced life? My opinion on this is that the state of absolute balance is called stagnation. So I don't think you can live a balanced life. What happens is that I think it was Einstein who said that to keep moving, to keep riding on a bicycle, you have to keep moving, basically. So in terms of living a balanced life, it's not about putting everything in balance and just wait, but it's keep moving. So you bring things back to balance over and over again. And it's in this act of keeping the balance, or putting the balance, or creating the balance, that's how you keep moving, and that's how you stay grounded, you stay present, you perhaps experience this more holistic way of living. That would be my opinion. What if our intellectual part is actually the most enjoyable part of our experience? Will the balanced state then be the ideal state? Yeah, intellect could be I can see that intellect could provide lots of fun, right? It could be a very enjoyable part of our experience, and at the same time it is a part of our experience, as you wrote in this comment, Des. But there's also more, right? There's not just the intellect, but our experience is composed of many different things. So you have your intellect, and you have your feelings also, you have your emotions, you have your sensations. So you can focus on what you hear, for example, or what you see, what you perceive. You also have this dynamics with the environment, so dynamics with other people, for example. So you can see here that experience is very, very complex, and there are quite a few different elements. But if the intellect for you is the most enjoyable one, and you prefer that, I mean, who's gonna stop you, right? If that's what you want to do, and if that's the most important part for you, there's nothing wrong with that, and nobody can stop you. Would the balanced state then be the ideal state? Well, you define the ideal for yourself, I think. So what means balance for me might be slightly different for you. So the thing is that what I'm describing here in terms of intellect and going too much into this intellectual realm is where we compensate, in a sense, or escape, or use the intellect at the expense of other resources and tools that we are having in our lives. So when our kind of perception or experience becomes so narrow that all we have is our intellect, I mean, maybe it works for some people. Maybe it's part of your learning or your journey, or you have to go through it, or you need to go through it, where you focus just on the experience, on the intellect. But there's always much more. So balance in this case would be subjective. So maybe for you the ideal balance state would be to balance just feelings and emotions, where you move between these two. Maybe you can add something more. So again, there's this issue of subjectivity. So I think that what also can be complicated in our lives, or rather how else we complicate our lives, is that we, as I was saying, with intellect, we might be creating these problems, but then once we experience actual, real, serious problems, we procrastinate. We put them off for later. And it's not just the problems, but it could be our responsibility. It could be things that we simply need to do, things that might be important for us. When we start procrastinating, we start complicating our lives, because the more we put things into the future, the more kind of unhappy our future self is going to be. So when we have some problems we need to deal with, or a responsibility to take care of, the more we put it off for the future, the more difficult it's going to be for us, in a sense, because the problem can grow, right? The problem can become more complex if it, for example, if it involves our other people, or maybe our health. Responsibility, yeah, maybe we can attend to the responsibility in the future, but what if in that time, in the future, during that time when we need to attend to that responsibility, something else comes up, and then we need to divide our attention, or maybe it becomes too much for us. So we're kind of procrastinating and living in the future and kind of focusing on what is going to be, what will happen, what we will do in the future or will not do. That complicates our lives. So in a sense, it's a little bit like not fully taking that responsibility for ourselves, because I think that, and don't get me wrong, I'm procrastinating very often as well. It happens to me. I'm not invincible to it, but I'm aware of the consequences. It used to be much worse for me in the past, but it's still there once in a while. The thing is that I think that procrastination, putting our problems for the future, putting off everything for the future, I'll do it later, I'll take care of it tomorrow, I'll start a new diet next week. We create this imaginary land in the future that doesn't exist. So what happens is that we're living life that doesn't exist, and we think it's so complicated. But if you take a look at what's happening here, is that since we are putting off these things in the future is so complicated because we've put so many things in there, so many responsibilities, so many problems, so many things we could be doing, and it's so complicated that we don't want to go there, and so it complicates our lives, I think. So kind of living in the future, I think it's a big way in which we complicate our lives. What is your take on higher consciousness, which seems to overtake the intellectual mind? So I will be taking general questions or questions unrelated to the subject at the end. So if you could ask me that again at the end of the live stream, I would be happy to answer that, because I don't want to deviate from the subject too much, because there will be some people here that want to discuss just the main theme. And the last thing on my list, and of course I would be really happy to hear your ideas, which you can put in the chat box. How else you complicate your life, for example, or how else we could complicate our lives. But the last thing on my list is the fact that we kind of waste energy or waste our attention on many different things, on too many things. So we have things in our lives that we could probably consider as distractions, but maybe in a way we are attached to them. So we waste this energy on things that don't help us in any way. Maybe there are people in our lives that are not right for us, for example. Maybe we put too much effort into maintaining certain relationships that don't serve us right, but we do it because we are good people. Maybe we focus on certain hobbies that used to bring us pleasure, but they are kind of became a duty or responsibility in our lives. Maybe we do certain chores in our house that could be done by someone else. Maybe we could hire someone. So many different things could be considered a simple waste of energy, waste of focus. So what happens is that we think that we have so many different things to do that it all becomes overwhelming again. Go back to this idea of being overwhelmed or stressed out or worried. So because we think that we have so many different things, we might feel like our life is, very difficult, very complicated. It's too much for us. So the particular image that comes to my mind in such a situation is when all things that you could be doing that come to your mind, all possible responsibilities or duties or simple, events or activities that you could be engaged in, are in a way of equal importance in your mind. So everything is kind of flat. So you shift your focus between different things, but at the end you're not really moving forward. So everything is kind of complicated, like a big puzzle with no solution, because everything is of equal importance. And also there are many different things. There might be many different things that are actually not that important. Since you don't know which things are the most important to you, and everything seems important, there might be things in your life that are actually not that important in a grand scheme of things. So is it best to live in the present? Well, I think there is a time for living in the present, and there is a time for example, planning for the future, or analyzing your past if you need to learn from your mistakes, or if you want to, see if there's something you could improve, for example. So, but that gives you, when you say that, oh yeah, there's a time for this, there's a time for that, that gives you again this choice and opportunity to be maybe a little bit more in control. Because I think that it is possible to always live in the present, and I think it wouldn't be such a bad life or such a bad idea. But you need to be I think you need to be in the right context, and you need to be in the right environment to do it. So for example, monastery would be a great environment to do it, because you don't need to plan for the future. You don't need to worry about how you're going to pay your bills, for example, next year. At the same time, in the Western world, if you have the resources, if you have a certain amount of stability in your life, so that you can be kind of sure and certain that no matter what happens, you're going to have some sort of stability. Like maybe you're a millionaire or something, so you don't have to worry about the resources. When you have that stability in your life, I think, yeah, living in the present could be great. But in other situations, when you are focused, for example, on growth or development, it might be difficult to be just in the present moment, because you want to learn from mistakes, for example. So that requires you to, go into your past experiences a little bit. Even if it happened 10 minutes ago, that already puts you outside of the present moment. And you want to consider where you might be going next. What could be the next step? So I think there is a time for this and there is a time for that. So is there anything else you guys want to put on this list of how we might be complicating our lives? Is there any other maybe causes or reasons that you see in your life that you think that might be complicating it? Randy asks, why is it so difficult to get rid of people that are not good for me? Well, it's kind of difficult to guess, because I don't really know you. I don't know your past experiences, but common causes of why it might be difficult to break certain relationships probably could be some traumatic experiences in the past that created maybe codependency within you, or so-called people-pleasing syndrome, or maybe beliefs that if you break the relationship, you're going to be a bad person. So something like that. So what else might be causing why life is complicated, or rather how we complicate our lives? And Baron says other people's negative behaviors. Right, but that kind of is outside of our control. So people can't really complicate your life unless you allow them to do so. So if you welcome to your life people that complicate it, that make a mess of it, that is your responsibility. On the other side, having said that, I know that accidents happen, we make mistakes, we associate ourselves with people with maybe we shouldn't have, but it's not that I think that this kind of attitude of thinking that, oh, people complicate my life, it robs you of your kind of personal power and your control, because you put the responsibility over your life onto other people. So I know it might be, it might take some time to mull over it, to digest it, but if you kind of flip it and say to yourself that I allowed people to complicate my life, that will be very empowering. It might take some time if it's new for you, but trust me, it's going to be empowering. Okay, so I thought in this last section we obviously start moving towards why we are here, which is how to simplify our lives. And I think there are many different things we can do. So obviously starting from the external world, so material world, as we could call it, is about taking stock of your possessions, material things. Are they useful? Are they not useful? So I'm not going to go too much into detail about this because it's something for us to determine. But our attachment to possessions, to material things can make our life cluttered in a sense. The more we have, especially of things that we don't need, the more we can actually start kind of feeling heavy. At least that's been my experience. The more I have, the more heavy it feels, because then you have more responsibility, then you have more things that you need to focus on, you need to take care of. But for other people it might be fine. But then again, as I was saying before, the subjective experience is something that should enable us to determine how much is too much, where is the balance point, how little is too little, for example. But a part of living the simple life is taking stock of our material things and obviously getting rid of things that you don't need. In terms of our behavior, attitudes, feelings, thoughts, emotions, there is this kind of philosophical perspective. It's called the law of parsimony, or Occam's razor. So basically this theory, or it's rather kind of way of thinking and doing things in a sense, is to look for the simplest solution. So for example, in science, some scientists use it. If you have different hypotheses equally valid, or different results of some tests or experiments that are equally valid, you go for the simplest one that requires the least amount of assumptions. Why is that? Because our assumptions complicate things, right? The more we assume about other people, about ourselves, about life in general, right? And the more we kind of allow these assumptions to influence our behavior and actions and decisions, the more complicated it's going to be. Why? Because it's not fully grounded in the reality, in what is, in our experience, in what is happening around us. So assumptions kind of leads back to this intellectualism. Assumptions might be good to some extent if you want to live in your head for a little while, or play with some ideas or theories. But the more assumptions you develop, the more opinions you develop about things, the more judgments, the more evaluations, right, which obviously influence the development of assumptions, the more you do it, the more kind of abstract existence you're gonna live. So obviously, as we can probably see in media, and it's been happening for, since the beginning of humanity. That's where all these ideologies come from. That's where all the kind of social problems come from, because we make all these assumptions and we develop all these theories that might not be entirely grounded in the reality. So that complicates things. So what you want to do is, when you encounter problems, when you need to make decisions, go for the simplest decisions or solutions you can find, because they will be the least based on your assumptions. They will be the least based on other people's assumptions, or kind of global or universal assumptions. The simpler they are, the more practical and the more grounded in reality the solutions and decisions will be. So I think that would be, the first step in generally simplifying our lives. And as I was saying before, living in the present moment. I feel like I sound like a broken record, because I literally emphasize this probably in all my videos, or at least most of them, about this importance of staying grounded. So I feel that this might be maybe a little bit misunderstood, in the sense that when we live in the present moment, we don't focus on anything else. We just focus on what is in front of us. We don't think, we don't use our reason, we don't use intellect. But what I actually mean is that living more presently is about not just focusing on what is in front of you, but also what is around you, what is happening in this kind of holistic way, in a sense. So it's, you play a part in this whole experience. There's your intellect, there are your feelings or sensations, but there are also things outside. So this whole present moment is composed of many different things. So going back to the present moment and focusing on what is. So, okay, there is an intellect that helps you to analyze what is, helps you to draw some conclusions, but the intellect is also responsible for making assumptions that might not be true. Intellect is also responsible for creating problems when there is none. And intellect is also responsible for creating this, maybe negative scenarios that cause you anxiety, stress, worrying about the future. So being grounded, I think that is the very fundament of a simple life, where you focus on what is in as much practical and grounded manner as you can. So in practical terms, in terms of your behavior or what sort of things you need to be doing, and a very simple things is, when you're hungry, you go eat. When you are tired, you take a nap or you go to sleep. So very simple things, right? Maybe it sounds silly to some people because it's so simple, but when you start doing it, you ground yourself more and more in the reality. You pull yourself out of this intellectual realm where you have all these ideas of, oh, I shouldn't be eating right now. Maybe it's too early, maybe it's too late. Oh, I shouldn't be sleeping now because it's the middle of the day. And, society disapproves of that or something like that. So you see, the intellect removes you from the reality, removes you from your own body, for example. And kind of what I was saying before about feeling like we are wasting our energy or wasting our time. The simple solution to that, obviously, is making priorities. So taking a stock of how each event in your life, how each thing that you need to do, responsibility, duty, how important it is really. And that takes, lots of honesty with yourself, because there might be things that you are attached to intellectually or emotionally, but it might not be having a lot of value. So there might be, for example, kind of bad relationships. There might be certain distractions in your life that have no value to you. Maybe you spend too much time on social media and stuff like that. And that complicates life, because then you go on social media, you read about news, for example, you read about other people. That provokes certain emotional responses. Then you start thinking about it. And instead of focusing on your personal growth or well-being or health, you focus on this, intellectual rubbish. So priorities, it's not just about kind of removing things that don't matter to us or are not important, but it's about investing energy into right things. So I think that maybe sometimes it's not possible to remove a person from our life, for example, or maybe it's not possible to stop performing certain chores in our lives or in our house. Maybe it's not possible to get rid of responsibilities. But what is possible, and it kind of goes back to this personal responsibility, is how much energy we're putting into different things in our lives. So obviously the more important something is, the more focus, the more energy you want to invest. The less important it is, the less energy and focus is going to go there. So energy, in my opinion, is basically attention. So the more attention you spend on something, for example, when you're watching a movie, that costs a certain amount of energy, because you need to put your attention into it. When you're having a conversation with someone, right, to maintain this conversation, you need to put your attention into it. So that consumes energy again. So the more attention something requires, the more of your energy will go into it. So obviously you want to put your energy and attention into things that matter, and maybe be a little bit greedy with things that are not that important. So maybe that conversation with someone doesn't thinking about things what to say next. Maybe that interaction, doesn't need to be based on your kind of constantly looking for ways to engage with that person. Maybe you don't need to focus as much on cleaning your house, or maybe it's, you don't have to put so much importance on social media. These are the examples that I can come up with. If you have any other ones, please drop them in a chat box. So prioritizing, assessing what is important, what isn't. This will help you to kind of direct your attention and energy into things that really matter. So what happens is, again, when we go back to this image I said before, where we might feel like everything is of an equal importance, that obviously creates lots of stress and worrying or anxiety even. So in that case, everything kind of looks flat in a sense, where everything is of an equal importance. The moment we start prioritizing and honestly assessing how important certain things are in our lives, the whole picture is going to change, because some things are going to start sticking out, right, in our kind of perceptual field in terms of our attention and focus, and some other things are going to start fading out, and the whole picture is going to start becoming more and more clear to us, clear and clear in a sense, because we're going to start noticing more and more of the things that are important, whilst other things are going to start fading into the background. So prioritizing is going to lead to a simpler life, because then all these other things that are not important, that actually do not really matter to us, are going to start disappearing, and that's going to declutter our life, so that we can stop wasting our energy. Do you meditate? If so, how much time is needed? Can you keep all the questions to the end, which are not fully related to the subject of simplifying the life? And the last thing, maybe actually not the last thing, maybe there are some more I can pull out of my sleeve, since you guys are very quiet. I was just talking to a previous time I was having a live stream that Friday people seem to be very quiet considering to Saturday people. It's kind of interesting because I used to be doing these live streams on Saturday. Anyway, an important part also, so I'm basically just listing all these things about how we can simplify our lives. What we can do is that can help us to narrow this focus down and support us in, placing attention to things that do matter to us, essentially simplifying everything, is being grateful for simple things in our lives. And I think especially these days where we can feel very comfortable, we can feel like we have everything, being grateful for the simple things shifts our attention from this abstract realm, from all the standards we might be having for what is considered to be good or amazing or joyful to us. When we start paying attention to the simple things, that narrows our focus down to this things that do matter to us, and isn't simplifying everything, because then we go from this complicated list of different standards that might be unattainable to us to things that actually are present in our lives already. So it brings our attention back to this present moment. And also I think this kind of gratitude practice, because you can make it a practice. For example, you could choose one thing you are grateful for in your life every day. Just one thing. That's going to take like 2 minutes. I think if you don't want to meditate, for example, if you don't like mindfulness, practicing mindfulness, if you don't like meditation, practicing gratitude is actually a great exercise to ground you more in the present moment, because then you start noticing things in your environment, in your life, that are present, that exist. So it doesn't take you into this realm of wishful thinking or imagining things, or I would be happy if I only had this, or I would be happy if I changed my behavior or changed my habit. So again, this is kind of futuristic thinking. But with gratitude, with noticing simple things in your life, that brings your attention to the present moment and helps you to stay grounded, helps you to stay focused on what actually exists. So that is way simpler than living in our heads, having all these expectations, and having all these standards for I'm gonna be feeling good only if I get something, only if I'm gonna become a different person. So, appreciating all the simple things, I think it should be the baseline of being a human, considering that life can be quite difficult for some, and we might be taking it for granted. So, I think that's pretty much on my list. I've tried to compose this list of practical things, and I hope you found it helpful. If you have any more ideas that could be put into this list, and if you believe that it could help you to simplify your life, or it could be valuable to other people, you're welcome to share them in the comment box. And I have around 4 or 5 minutes left, so if you want to ask any question, I'm here. If it's a general question or a question that is not fully related to the subject, then I'm here. Hima, never know what to ask, to be honest. Don't want to be a bother. You're not a bother, no way. I'm really happy that so many of you is coming to this live streams. And I'm not doing this live streams for myself, but I'm doing it for you guys. as much as I can. Hopefully there is some value to some people. So no, you are not a bother. In fact, as I was saying a few times in this live stream, I really welcome all these comments and questions, because you guys can contribute to the live stream and which direction this live stream is going to go to. Florian asks, how do you deal with lack of social relationships? Most of the time I don't think about it a lot. Just when I watch other people, I regret I'm into more social activities. Am I complicating on this? So in your comment, what you're saying, there are a few things. So how do you deal with lack of relationships? Obviously. And then that most of the time, you don't think about it a lot. But then you watch other people and then you regret that you are not participating more in social activities. So I'm not sure what your experience is like. Some people are more social than others. Some people are less social than others. If you're not thinking about it, and it only comes to your mind when you're watching other people, for example, when you're seeing other people, what other people are doing, I think there are two options for this. You're either, very private, introverted person that has, very low kind of social drive or social need for building relationships, or something has happened to you maybe in the past, maybe you kind of repress the need for social relationships. It's kind of, difficult to say. So either of that. The fact that you are asking me though, however, the fact that you are asking me that how to deal with lack of social relationship is that some part of you perhaps wants to have some more social relationships. So, there are a few options. You could try therapy, you could try coaching, you could try, research, or you could try simply exposing yourself to social situations. So, for example, you could join clubs, you could join, certain meetings that people engage in certain hobbies. You could join a class. So anything that puts you in social situation. If you want to overcome it, if it's for example, it might be a social anxiety kind of repressed and deeper within you, but exposing yourself, putting yourself in social situations might help you to break this pattern. But then I would be very observant of what's happening. What happens when you start engaging with other people? What comes up? Having little social relationships makes my life simple in some sense, but on the other hand, it devoids my life of future purpose and I feel empty. Yeah. So it simplifies everything, but at the same time you see that there is some value in having social relationships. There is some value in building relationships and being, for example, intimate with other people and connecting and sharing. So that sounds to me a little bit like a conflict. So what I would say is that you need to pick your side. You either go, accept the fact that, for example, you don't want to have relationships because it makes your life simple, or you go and pursue this value of building relationships and connecting with other people. All right, so I can't see any other questions. It's been a pleasure connecting with you all. Thank you so much for joining me today. And I will be taking some time off, a couple of weeks actually. So I think that the next live stream will be in around 3 weeks or so. Probably gonna be on Friday, but might be during the weekend. I haven't decided yet. So I hope to see you all next time. Thanks again for joining and take care of yourself. Bye.